Hello everyone and welcome. In this lecture we'll learn about time zones. As usual, we start by importing NumPy and pandas. Before we can see time zones, let's create a time object by using the dateRange function. So pd.dateRange, and let's pass a start time, period, and frequency for our dateRange function. So let's say 2016, 12, 15th for our start time, and let's also pass some timestamp. Let's say 0000, and for periods let's use 12, and for our frequency let's use days. Okay, and let's save this in a variable called date. So now if we call our date object, we'll have a series of times, right? Starting from the 15th of December 2016 all the way to December 26, 2016. So by default, if we don't pass any value for the time zone information, the value will be none. So this date object has a method known as time zone. Now if we call, so tz means time zone. If we call time zone on our date object, the value will be none. So if I save our date that time zone in a variable, and if I call my variable x, I get nothing. The value is none. That's because we have to pass time zone as an attribute, otherwise the default value is none. So let me copy this whole date object, paste it here, and let's pass a time zone. So there's an attribute known as tz, that means time zone, and we can set the time zone to be any time zone that we want. Let's pass Euro London, Europe London, Europe London. Now if we call the tz method, the time zone method on our date object, we see that you have a Europe London time zone. Okay, so we have to specifically pass time zone as an attribute and assign some value. Otherwise the default value for time zone is empty or none. There are ways that we can find out how many kinds of time zones that we have, and I think there are over 400 time zones. There is what is known as common time zone and all time zones, and there's about greater than 400 common time zones and more than, I guess, 500 all time zones. Let's find out the exact numbers for those common and all time zones. There is a module known as PyTZ, and what I will do is we'll import the common time zone and all time zone methods from the PyTZ module. So from PyTZ, let's import common time zones and all time zones. What we can do is find out lengths of our common time zones, and if we run it, so we have 434 common time zones. Okay, and to find out how many all time zones that we have, let's pass lengths of all time zones. So we have 586 all time zones. Okay, and if you want to find out what are all those common time zones, we can print them out. Let's print the common time zones. So these are all the time zones. We have Africa, Accra, Africa, Addis Ababa, Algiers, Asmara, and so on. So these are all the time zones. And it says we have 434 of those. Okay, let's just index few of them and see. Let's say 4 to 20, for instance. Okay, so you can index them and see whichever ones that you want. And you can do the same for all time zones. You can print out all the time zones, and you see that there's a difference. So if you subtract 434 from 586, you'll get the difference, which are not common time zones. So there's about 152 non-common time zones. You can also print out those and check them out if you want. But I just wanted to show you that there are lots of time zones. And you can use those time zones in your time zone attribute. Okay? So we can copy this, paste it here, and I'll just pass one of these time zones. We can copy that and paste it here. So now if we run this and then call that time zone, so this is the Africa Bujumbura time zone. Next, I'll show you two methods that will be handy when we deal with time zones. They are called the TZ localize and TZ convert. So we use these two methods to deal with time zones. First, let's see how we can use the TZ underscore localize method. Okay. Let's start by creating a timestamp. So we'll use pandas timestamp method, and let's say December 5, let's say December 5th, 2016, and for time let's use 8/24/23, and let's save this in a variable called time. Okay, so if we call our time object, we have a timestamp December 5th, 2016. Let's say we want to add a time zone to this timestamp object, and we can do that by calling the TZ localize method. Okay, so if you want to add a time zone to a timestamp object, you can call or use the TZ localize method. So all we have to do is call the TZ localize on our timestamp object. So time.tz underscore localize, and then pass a time zone. For instance, let's say Asia, Tokyo, and let's save this in a variable called time zone. Now if we call our time zone object, we see that there is a time zone of Asia, Tokyo. That's the TZ localize method. The next method I want to show you is the TZ convert method. Let's say we want to change the time zone from Asia, Tokyo to, let's say, US Central or US Eastern. How can we do that? We can do that by calling the TZ convert method. Okay, so all we have to do is we have our time zone object here, and then we'll call the TZ convert method on it, right? And then we'll pass our time zone, and let's set it to be equal to US Eastern. And if we save this in a variable, let's say time zone new, and now if we call our time zone new object, we see that we have US Eastern as our time zone. Okay, so that's the difference between TZ localize and tz-convert methods. If you are using tz-localize, there shouldn't be any time zone information, okay, for your timestamp object. Otherwise, you'll get an error. Whereas if you are using the tz-convert method, you only use it to convert a certain time zone to a different time zone, okay, not the other way around. For instance, if I call the tz-convert method to assign a time zone to a timestamp, I'll get an error. Let me show you that. So if I copy our timestamp object and call the tz-convert method, this will give me an error. Okay, it says cannot convert tz naive timestamp. Use tz-localize to localize, right? Okay, so that's the difference between those two methods. Next, let's see daylight savings. So we have daylight savings twice a year, once in March and once in November. So during those daylight savings, after midnight is 12, so after 12 o'clock we have 1 and then 2 and then 3. So when it changes from 1 to 2, I think it goes from 1, and then after 1:59 again it becomes 1, or after 2:59 the time goes back to 2 o'clock. So we have that daylight saving. I don't know the exact order, whether from 1 to 2 or from 2 to 3, but we have that 1 hour of daylight savings. So let's see how we can deal with daylight savings. Okay, what I will do is we'll use the dateRange function to create some time, and we'll save it in a variable called time. So let's use pandas dateRange method, and then pass, let's say, 2016 March 8th, for instance, March 8th, and let's pass, for periods we'll pass 12, and then for time zone let's use US Eastern. What I will do is I'll create a series object. I'll create a series object from this time object, and I'll show you the daylight saving. Okay, so let's create, and we'll save this in a variable called time series, pd.series, and I'll create a series by using this time object. So we'll pass range of 12, since we have 12 periods here, and then for our index we'll use the time object that we created. Now if I call my time series object, so here you'll see, so starts from March 8th until March 19th, right? And it's a US Eastern time zone, so you have -5, -5, -5, and then here you see from when we go from March 13th to March 14th, the time zone changes to -4, right? So suddenly from -5, now the time zone is -4, -4, and so on. So this is daylight saving. The time zone went from -5 to -4 because of the daylight saving. Okay, I just wanted to show you an example of a daylight saving. Similarly, if I take a bigger period and range, let's say 25, and let me create another time series object. So for range, let's pass 25 and run these two cells. Now let me call our time series object, So here you see from March 13th to March 14th, the time zone goes from -5 to -4. So that's the daylight saving. And then you'll see that you'll have a time zone of -4 until the next daylight saving, which is in which is in November, right? So I just wanted to show you that. We have another time zone known as UTC, and UTC takes care of this daylight saving. So regardless of where you are, UTC is not affected by daylight saving, or it's one way of dealing with daylight savings. Okay, so no matter where you are, you can use a UTC time zone, and it will be the same throughout the world. Let's see how we can handle that by using the UTC time zone. So if I copy this, and let's reduce the period to 12, and for time zone this time we'll pass UTC. So we have our time object, and let's create a time series, and pd.series range 12, right? And for our index we'll use time. Now if I call my time series object, we'll see that we don't have to worry about daylight saving, right? So if you see the time zone here for UTC, it's +0, +0, +0. Even when we go from March 13th to March 14th, right? No difference here. +0, +0. So our time zone stays the same. Okay, that's one way of handling daylight savings, by using the UTC time zone. It's a universal time zone, and it's the same regardless of where you are located.